Conceive, believe, achieve.
This is former UFC middleweight champion of the world, Michael Bisping.
Paddy the Baddy here. You're listening to Combat Sports UK.
And you're watching Combat Sports UK.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Combat Sports UK podcast. We're firing up with another boxing episode this week. Had a little bit of a different structure planned for today, but breaking news coming out over the last few days has led to us needing to go down the same rabbit hole we've been down so many times before. So, as you can see, I've got Jay Miller with me again today. Jay, how you doing, mate?
I'm all good here, Nathan. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, not bad, mate.
Have you got the weather I've got here?
It depends. It can't seem to make its mind up here, mate. It's hit and miss. The sun's out, then it's pissing it down.
Oh, well, it's absolutely made up its mind up here. It's been pissing it down all day. I've had hail, I've had thunderstorms. Can't get the Wi-Fi working, so fingers crossed it all stays intact.
Yeah, well, I think me and Taylor did the MMA pod on Tuesday night, and we started about 40 minutes after we were supposed to. And I think it was, closing in on midnight by the time Taylor had got finished and we'd jumped off the call. So if anyone's wondering, that's why the MMA pod is just a little bit late coming out this week. No fault of our own, just technical difficulties. So how's your week been, mate? Been up to much?
Yeah, all good here. John has been just covering the stuff for Combat Sports UK at the minute. I mean, we did the TJ Brown interview. That should hopefully be coming out on the company's YouTube channel soon. Covering the Dana White's Contender Series as I do every Tuesday. But apart from that, not much going on in my life, mate. What about you?
Bit of work, mate. Changing jobs just recently, so I'm coming towards the end of one tenure and waiting for a new one to start. But I have a company car at the minute, so I'm running around trying to find a new car, and I've bought one today. So
what have you got?
I've got a Vauxhall Insignia, just
Very
something
nice.
for the time being to kind of just put me on. I've got a little company car at the minute, but that'll be going back in the next few weeks. So I've been rushing around looking at as many as I can whenever I've got some free time in an evening, and yeah, I've got one sorted now, so I'll be picking that up over the weekend. So
well, at least you've got a job sorted, mate. I'm in the position, just coming out of uni, still looking for a full-time one. You know what the climate's like at the minute, so yeah. Hopefully will want to be coming up for me soon as well.
There you go. So anybody looking for anybody to talk sports or anything to do with that?
Yeah,
Jay's your man. Hit him up. We'll get a job interview somewhere, mate. Definitely.
There you go.
Maybe you'll become a car salesman and you can knock me some money off here.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick discount. Combat Sports UK personal discount.
Yeah, make sure it's 20% off at least.
Yeah.
So obviously we've got fights coming up this weekend, but we have just had fights gone last weekend. We didn't dive into them too much because there was nothing major to kind of pick the bones out of there. But we had Luis Alberto Lopez fighting up against his second defense. Beat Josh Warrington, defended against Mick Conlon, and defended against Gonzalez this weekend, and came through relatively unscathed. Another decent performance and puts him in the line for some unification fights. Also on that card, we had the hot prospect Xander Zayas, who looked absolutely phenomenal and seems to be getting better every single time. So he's an exciting prospect to keep your eyes on. But there's some boxing coming up this weekend, and I thought we were going to be starting the show talking about the biggest news of this week, which was going to be the Joyce rematch, and delve into all that, which is something we are going to dive into here. But that's not the big talking point, is it?
A certain name has come up again. After last week, we thought we were done with it, but a certain name has come up again.
That's right. It's time to get the omelettes back out, everybody. We're talking about Conor Benn. Conor Benn is back in action this weekend, something which nobody was expecting to be saying.
No.
But no doubt he's fighting this Saturday in Florida. It's been announced last minute, 4 days notice. What's your thoughts, mate?
Well, it's just come out of the blue, hasn't it? I mean, we've had this really tricky situation going on at the minute where the National Anti-Doping Panel have lifted the suspension on him, but we've got UCAD and the British Border Control saying, no, we need to get this appealed. We've had Robert Smith coming out just a few hours ago and saying he shouldn't be fighting. This isn't right. In terms of the setup for it, mate, I and the rest of the media had heard nothing about it coming into it. It's a complete shock to all of us. What are your opinions on it, and how much do you know about his opponent? Because I'm not too clued up on him myself.
Not a lot, to be honest, mate. And I think that's part of the reason and part of the hype. I think it's somebody fetched in. So last minute opponent for Conor Benn, who's been out for the best part of a year. Well, he's been out for over a year now. Obviously, the Eubank fight was scheduled for October last year, so we are talking over a year out the ring now for Conor Benn. But it's a tick over opponent, and we all know what it's going to lead to. They're looking at the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, maybe by the end of the year, early next year. But you mentioned Robert Smith's comments. I've actually got them in front of me here. So for those that don't know, the British Boxing Board of Control we're talking about, Robert Smith is the top man there. And Robert Smith has basically said that Conor Benn is not clear. He has not cleared his name and should not be fighting this weekend. The problem is that's true and it's not true. Conor Benn is clear to fight. He is legally allowed to fight. There is no suspensions pending. He has a license now with I think it's the boxing authority in Texas, licensing authority in Texas. So the statement was he hasn't cleared it. A number of issues are still outstanding, which everybody's aware of. We've decided to appeal the NADP decision, which was the appeal that we were told was going ahead, but we've all heard nothing since, other than Eddie Hearn saying that they've not received any news on that and they don't know what's happening. But when Eddie Hearn says he's cleared his name, we haven't had an explanation of how the positive test came about, so I don't quite agree with Eddie on that one. Personally, I don't think he should be boxing until this matter is cleared. And I think it goes to show the state that boxing's in, mate. We've got a fighter going to fight this weekend who's failed a test, has no license within the British Boxing Board of Control, is able to go elsewhere and obtain a license and just fight like nothing ever happened. And I'll be honest with you, mate, I don't know anything about Conor Benn's opponent, really, in too much detail, but I fear for him a little bit, mate, because we're potentially talking about putting look, we don't know whether he's guilty or not. All we know is he's failed a test, but we're talking about potentially putting in somebody who's failed a test for a banned substance and just allowing them to just wander back into the ring. It doesn't sit right with me, mate, to be honest.
No, well, I said this last week on the podcast that take aside Chris Eubank Jr. for a second, he's going to need Conor Benn is going to need a setup fight before that fight if it does happen. And I said I fear for any person that comes up against him because we don't know the level of testosterone, we don't know the levels of fighting ability that he's going to be at coming into this fight due to the substance that was found in his system. I don't know how there's such a big gap between England and America that you're legally allowed to fight in one country and you can't fight in another. There's not that big a difference between the two countries and the boxing scenes, so I can't get my head around that either. But that, again, as you say, is indicative of the world of boxing where it's done by country and by promotion and by panel. We just don't know.
It's the do whatever you fucking want sport. Let's be honest. There's no rules. They talk about rules. I mean, we talk about Eddie Hearn, and I was singing his praises the other week because he's bringing in. He's talking about VADA testing for all matchroom athletes. They're catching Hellenius, Baumgartner, all these other athletes that have failed tests under the matchroom banner, or fighting under the matchroom banner on their cards at least. And you think, well, that's great. Obviously, they're testing. But what's the point in testing if you're going to do nothing about it?
No.
We've got Conor Benn's failed a test, and here he is fighting. No punishment, no final result, no final outcome to this situation at all. Basically, all we've got is someone who failed a drugs test. He says he did. He said he's not done anything wrong. VADA say, yes, you have. That's it.
Yeah.
Just crack on.
Do you genuinely believe Hellenius or Baumgartner are going to get any suspension at all?
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? I mean, for me, probably. And why? Because they're not as marketable, they're not as big a names, and they don't make as much money as Conor Benn does. They don't have the resources that Conor Benn does.
No.
It's like, I mean, we've seen it a number of times before, haven't we? We've seen Canelo go for surgery, basically whilst he was banned.
Yeah.
That one's kind of slipped under the rug. You've had Tyson Fury with, again, people might not like this, but his mental health problems forced him out the ring again. You know what I mean? It's Tyson Fury had to serve a ban as well. That's the only reason he's got the license now, because he did that backdated 2-year ban, didn't he? So I think it was 2 years anyway. But there's no consistency in the sport whatsoever. It is just literally make it up as you go along. And this is what diehard boxing fans will always watch the sport. We might get pissed off, we might do whatever else, but we'll always watch it. But there's no new fans coming over to watch boxing because they can't understand any of this. It's when this is the stuff that hits the mainstream media. This is the stuff that everybody talks about. And all they can say is, well, he's failed the drugs test. Oh, did he get banned then? No. How's he fighting this weekend then? Well, they just couldn't prove it. Well, they have proved it. He's failed the test.
Yeah. And this may be why we're seeing influencer boxing, take off a bit. I'm personally not too clued up about it, but I think in my mind, there's only one or two promotions that they all fight under. It's a similar story as what we talked about with MMA last week. That how can we have a sport where an anti-doping agency is arguing with the British Board of Control and the British Board of Control are arguing with Matchroom Boxing, and you've got tons of different boxers fighting on different promotions and they can't sort anything out. We're even getting problems between countries. So that's limit. What other sport is limited by so internationally by that different countries have to have such different rule sets?
It's crazy because you look at other sports and you look at, I'm not a cricket fan, but I know that cricket has one governing body, doesn't it? You've got, different ones for different countries, but overall you've got one governing body. That you look at football, you've got UEFA and you've got the FA for English football. You look at all these different sports, they're all under one banner. They all take part under one set of rules, one set of guidelines that's laid out. Say, if you do this, you get this. You cannot do this. You can do this. These are the rules, and everybody abides to them. Boxing's just make it up as you go along. You look at each individual governing body, they've all got different ideas. You've got different state athletic commissions offering, we'll give you a license, but we won't give you a license. Either you're fit to receive a license or you're not. Yeah. And it sits badly. I'm not surprised that he's got a license, but Robert Smith and the British Boxing Board of Control have notified Conor Benn's new licensing authority that they don't agree with him being a license. They don't feel there's been any outcome, and they don't think that the comments I just read there, the statement from Robert Smith, they've passed that message on, and yet here he is with a license boxing again, on 4 days' notice. I mean, you look at the card itself, and it tells you everything you need to know. This is Eddie Hearn and Matchroom Boxing sliding this in at the last minute. So it doesn't pick up a lot of traction. It's going to pick up traction anyway, but what I mean is there's not weeks. We're not talking a full camp. We're not talking 8, 10, 12 weeks away from a fight where people can stick the raw in or look to take legal action or anything like that. The truth is they can't take legal action. But you're in a position where he's slid in. People kick off, people are known, people talk about it on podcasts like we are, in interviews and articles and everything else. And before we know it, he'll be in the ring, knocked some randomer out, and hand will be raised at a calling for the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, and everything will be heading towards that. And then I was just going to say, and then from that point, where do you go? Because he's already been back in the ring. He's already boxed. You know what I mean? Yeah. But the reality of the situation is Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr. is only a big fight in the UK. Yeah. So what do you do with it? He can't fight. He can fight in the UK with another license, but the British Boxing Board of Control are not going to be happy with him boxing in the UK. Simple as.
Well, as you just mentioned there, he's been placed with 4 days' notice on the undercard of Hitchens Zepeda over in America. Now, would we as a UK audience be all tuning into Hitchens Zepeda as a card?
No.
Might have a look at the main fight, but as a broad aspect of the UK, no, we wouldn't be.
Well, no, I mean the card itself is a cracking card. There's some really good fights on there, but you look at the main event and the outside, unless you're a diehard boxing fan again, you won't really even recognise the names at the top of the bill. So why is Conor Benn not the star of that show? But it's simple. He's not the star of the show because they don't want him to be. They don't want the headline act. They want him just slipped in there somewhere, have a quick knock, get back out, we'll get this Chris Eubank Jr. fight on. Yeah. That's where it's heading, without a shadow of doubt. I mean, we'll look at the... Well, if we delve into the card itself for a minute, you mentioned it there. We've got a hot prospect in Richardson Hitchens, who's shown nothing but good signs so far. But he's in there against Zepeda. Zepeda's got the know-how, let's say, to maybe make this an interesting knock. I don't fancy him to win the fight, but I fancy him to, give us a good showing. And I think it's a good step for Hitchens at this time.
I mean, as you just mentioned on the card there, I haven't personally looked at the full card, but as you say, it could be a cracking night for the die-hard boxing fan. But that isn't what Eddie Hearn is targeting. That's not what Matchroom are targeting. They're targeting the big audiences. Eubank Benn is targeting historians of sport in England. It's targeting the mainstream public.
I think the thing is, before I just touch on one of the other fights on that card, I think the problem is you've got. Do you believe that this was announced? Do you think Conor Benn was given 4 days' notice?
No. Well, I saw Rodolfo Azorco, who is his upcoming opponent, if that's how you pronounce his name, say that he kind of alluded to the fact that he'd known this was coming for a while. Whether this is all talk, I don't know. Whether they've swept it under the rug, I don't know. But he's kind of alluded to the fact that he has known it's been coming for a while and he is prepared.
Well, my stance on it is this. Conor Benn announced to everybody that he was going to be fighting months ago. Yeah. He also was back in training. He's obviously been in camp. He's obviously on weight and ready to go. It pisses me off because you see all this out there where you say, no, well, we're going through this process and we're doing this and we're doing that and we're doing whatever else and we're going to do this for the sport and this for the sport and this for the sport, and then it's announced on 4 days' notice that Conor Benn's coming back after a failed test with no punishment, no reprimands, no nothing. And I just think it's utter bollocks. Conor Benn's probably been in camp for the last 8 to 10 weeks. He's not rushing. Yeah. They're not putting all this money and all this resource and all this time and all the reputation on the line for Conor Benn to give him a 4-day notice fight. Because whether you think much to the opponent or not, they don't. If he goes in there and gets beat, that Eubank fight's off. That's money lost for everybody.
He's had a year and a half out of the ring, and I don't know much about his opponent in Rodolfo Orozco, but it's looking at his record, for example: 32 wins, 3 losses, 24 knockouts, never been finished, 16-fight win streak between 2018 and 2022, professional since 16 years old. There is all of the makings there. Whoever he's faced in his career, if you go in on short notice to get knocked out or to, as you say, within a click of your fingers, that Eubank fight could be off. And as you know, they're not going to have risked a year and a half out the ring on 4 days' notice against an opponent this game.
No, and I think you just mentioned then 32 fights. Is that right?
35 fights, 32 wins.
35 fights. I mean, for me, if you've had 35 fights and no one really knows too much about you, it talks about the level of those fights and those opponents. And I don't want to do him a disjustice here because I've not actually looked at his record. I don't know if there's any names on there of any real note. No. But you're talking about 32 wins from 35 fights. You're not a prospect. You're not a hot prospect coming round. You're in there and you've been fighting in a certain country at a certain level. And that's how I look at it. And that's, when you say he's never been stopped, that'll be the narrative going into fight week. Yeah. He's never been stopped before, and then Conor Benn will go out, roided up, and smash him to bits.
I think the other narrative to just quickly mention is also he is actually only 24 years old, despite having all those fights. So not a prospect, but when you start your career that early, you can't. We're talking about somebody this weekend in Joyce, who's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. He's come into it much later. So, but as you say, in terms of our eyes, a bit of a disservice calling him a nobody, but we're not going to know too much about him from a UK perspective.
No. What do you think? A two-part question, really. What was your feelings on Conor Benn prior to his failed test? Because obviously when we talked about the Eubank fight, we were talking about Conor Benn was the hero with his dad's name and Eubank was the enemy, if you like, the bad guy. And that was kind of the narrative. I think you'd see that completely switch if the fight did get made now, which we all know it's going to. But what were your thoughts on Conor Benn before this? And what are your thoughts on Conor Benn now? Taking away whether he should or shouldn't be fighting, or I'm just talking about him as a person, as an athlete. Just give me what you think.
You know what it is? I quite liked him. I actually went back the other day and watched their first face-off, Eubank and Conor Benn, from over a year ago on Matchroom's channel, and although Chris Eubank was the one that's making you laugh, he's cracking, he's the wisecracks and he's the humorous one. Conor Benn talks so straight, and he knows what he's talking about. He knows the kind of situation he's in when it comes to this Eubank fight. And I really liked him. Very exciting fighter. We don't know if ring rust is going to be a thing coming back into it, but made a knockout in his last fight against Van Heerden. And yeah, I really liked him. But what I think of him now is, it's difficult because, as we kind of alluded to last week, usually it's innocent until proven guilty. But in boxing's case, it's guilty until you're proven innocent. And at the minute, he hasn't done that. And if he has done it knowingly, then I am completely against him, not wanting him to be involved in the sport at all. But if he has been by accident, whatever way possible, even strict liability coming into it, I can't hold it completely against him. And I'm almost more angry at the Matchroom and the promoters and the way that they handle the whole situation. But what about you, mate?
Exactly the same as you, mate. I was a big fan of Conor Benn. He came in, obviously, he had those knocks against Cedric Pernell. Showed a lot of guts in those fights. Whether you thought that he won the first one or not, that's up to you. But he showed some stones. He went away. He's been obviously worked hard. He's been in there learning. He's got better and better and better. Now, what's the reason behind that? It can't all be performance enhanced. He's obviously dedicated. He obviously works hard. But when you listen to him in interviews, he seemed like a nice guy. All right, there was a little bit of that tough guy act, or not act, but I think he's just maybe like that. You looked at his dad. Yeah. Same sort of thing. Just it's built into the character a little bit. But for me, I was a big Conor Benn fan of his fights and of the person. And I've got to be honest with you, mate, I've completely switched. Right. I hope he gets smashed to bits this weekend. I hope this kid coming in absolutely leathers him. And I'll tell you why. There's two ways of looking at this. Number one is, for me, he's been proven guilty. Those tests prove that he's guilty. But his attitude since then has absolutely stunk for me. It's the way he's handled himself. He's been an absolute PR disaster. He's just taken shots at everybody. He's told the fans, go fuck yourself. He's just lashed out at so many people. And then you see him at these events where he's smacking microphones out at Gareth A. Davies. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a massive fan of Gareth either, but smacking a microphone out at Gareth A. Davies' hands. He's walking past and fucking pushing Kell Brook when he's in the middle of an interview with, I think it was IFL. And you just think, the fucking stones on this guy. Like, what's his problem? If ever there was somebody that looked like they were on steroids, it's him. Because he's running around.
So the one thing I really hated, that I found really disrespectful, was after the Eubank Liam Smith first fight, when he got knocked out, him and his dad giving it the fuck you on the camera, he's giving it the old signs to it and saying, this is what I'll do to you and stuff like that. And it's like, handle yourself with a bit more class, mate. You're the one in the wrong here, not him. This fight's only happening because of what you did. So don't start taking the piss out of him for being involved in it.
Yeah, and I think the thing is as well, it's you're the one that's done something wrong. We talk about the strict liability, whether he's ingested something or not. I mean, people always hate this MMA comparison, right? Because we've had plenty of this in our sport as well, in MMA. But you look at the Ovincent Brew one that's just come out there, and you look at Bobby Green, and you look at some of these other circumstances. These fighters have ingested something from a supplement, and they've said, this is a supplement that I use. And we're not talking a year later. We're talking within days, weeks. This has been handed over and said, can you test this, because this is the supplement I take and I think this might be the issue. And they test it and they go, that is contaminated with XYZ substance. Yep. So they still get a ban because of the strict liability side of it, but it's a reduced ban. You're talking 6 months. You know what I mean? It's stuff like that. It's not even by the time these fighters have come out of one camp and gone into the next, sometimes they don't fight for that period of time anyway. So we are talking about something where, like you said, if he's ingested it unintentionally, prove that. Yeah. It shouldn't be difficult. If you've got a certain diet, which all fighters do, and you've got certain things that you do and don't drink and certain supplements that you do and don't take, that's the only way you could have got it in your system. So have them all tested And if one comes back saying, yeah, we've found clomiphene in this, well, there you go. You're cleared. Your name's cleared. You can say, this was my supplement. This is what was in it. Don't get me wrong. Half of these athletes go onto Google and search and fucking find a supplement that's got it in and say, this is what I was taking. But, you know what I mean? It's just fucking... It boils my piss, I'll be honest with you, because the way I look at it, you've failed this test. The eggs thing's been chucked at you by the WBC, and you've said no, that's not it. You've said it's a problem with the testing procedure itself, and you've
remained
adamant that that's the case. All of a sudden, that's gone quiet. If I was Conor Benn and I was Matchroom Boxing and all this was going off, you'd be going after VADA. You'd be saying, come out in public, you'd be releasing X, Y, and Z documents and saying, this is what happened and this is the proof that we've got, and we could all make our own minds up, and you would probably find most people would go, okay. Because I'll be honest, I talk about Conor Benn and I give some shit because I don't like the attitude he's given and whatever else. I'm actually not convinced he's guilty.
No.
I'm really not. Because there's something about what he said with the testing procedure where you went, okay, well, open that rabbit hole then, let us go down it. Let's see what the problem is.
Do you think that's how Conor Benn's got to progress in his career now? He's kind of got to be that villain in boxing. He's almost in a WWE sense. He's got to try and make his name off of being the villain of the sport.
Yeah, well, don't get me wrong. You know, you've got to be, for him to turn another 180 and become the good guy that everyone's on side with. It's a fickle sport. It doesn't need that much. He needs to go out there, knock a few people out, play the heartstrings on the microphone and say, I've missed this sport. I've had a real tough time. You don't understand what I've been through, a bit like he did on that Piers Morgan interview. And some people will swing round to that. And after a period of time, they'll forget about it. Look at Tyson Fury. Look at Canelo. Heroes of the sport for a lot of people now.
Look at MMA, John Jones, people like that. Everybody loves him.
Classed as the greatest heavyweight of all time.
Yeah.
But with John, the funny thing is, you talk about John Jones and you say, well, he is probably the greatest fighter of all, not heavyweight, the greatest fighter of all time, the GOAT of MMA. And everyone goes, yeah, but is he really? Because, and everyone does mention it. Yeah. Whereas in boxing, because it's so often, so frequent, and it's not a rare event, you don't talk about Tyson Fury, you don't talk about Canelo. I say it on here, but, we're talking to a limited amount of people here, maybe more so after we get a few episodes in. But, we're at a point where it's just the norm in boxing. And, he fails a drugs test, bounce back. I mean, you look at Dylan White, for example. What are we on now? 3-4 tests that he's failed at different points during his career. It's more than that, but I'm talking 3 or 4 incidents over a period of time. The tests might be double that because there's the A and the B sample. But it's just, you look at Baumgardner and you look at Hellenius and you look at some of these other fighters out there that are testing as well, and you just think the sport's just riddled. It's absolutely riddled. And yeah, okay, it could be a supplement, but prove it. Go to those extremes, prove that you're innocent. Everybody will be okay with you cracking on.
It's almost like the way I see it is boxing and combat sports in general are already sports that, as fans, we kind of have to convince wider society that they're modern, that they're not barbaric historic sports. We already have a hard enough time as it is convincing the general news and the general public that it is all right, and then you add all this crap into it, and you've got fighters who are going through stuff or have been through stuff in their personal life anyway. Surely you on a personal level don't need this coming out on your name. You're already fighting hard enough as it is.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned other sports then, and I think it's probably a perfect thing to say, because you look at Lance Armstrong, for example. Look at the media outroar for that, because cycling is more of a universally recognised sport, if you like, than, it's got more eyes on it than boxing and MMA, for example, because the niche kind of sports hours where you've got to have a certain level of something wrong with you to be a fan. You know what I mean? Yeah. Cycling, anybody can tune in, watch it, and be a fan of it. Not me personally, but
I can't. But yeah,
if that's your sport, by all means, But I'm not into the lycra, and I'm even less into putting it into action. So we've got a situation there, though, which broke news everywhere. He's failed this test, he's done this, he's done whatever else. There's books written about him. He was slandered, slated, slagged off for X, Y, and Z. And, we're looking at something in boxing here where there's physical contact involved and he could seriously hurt another individual. And it's just like, well, we've made a bit of a stink about it, but we've not been able to do anything about it, so he can just crack on. The fundamentals of boxing are absolutely fucked.
Yeah, I guess kind of moving on a tiny bit, looking at Conor Benn and the fight coming up this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
If he gets through him, but very slowly, if it goes to decision, if it's not very good performance, or even worst case scenario, he loses, what do you think's next for him?
Well, I think it answers a lot of questions. For starters, I don't envisage him losing. I'm hopeful, but I'm not envisaging it.
We might want to get him on this podcast at some point, mate. Don't keep slagging him off all the time.
No, well, if he's on, I won't be. Like I said, I was a Conor Benn fan. I just think the way that he's carried on since then just absolutely stinks. Just lashed out at everybody without proving any shade of innocence. Now, if he's innocent, I get it. If he's innocent and he's just thinking, look at all these people slagging me, slating me, doing what? But we're only slagging and slating off the evidence that we've got, and you've given us no evidence to suggest that you're innocent. Eddie said, well, this suggests that such and such, and he said, suggests this. You've never shown us it.
No. You've
gone to all that extreme and spent all that money on this big documentation that you've put together and sent out. None of us have seen it. And there's a reason we haven't, because it's utter bollocks. It's probably not even real. Do you know what I mean? It's just a PR show, and it's just shit. I don't believe a word of it. So I think, going back to your question, if he goes out there and even looks ordinary, he goes in, he wins a 12-round fight, it's relatively convincing, but the power's obviously not there. It's an easy spin. This guy's never been stopped before.
Is it a bit of a lose-lose situation for him? Because if he goes out there and absolutely knocks him out in a round, everybody's going to go, well, where's that power come from?
Yes and no. Yes, you're right in that respect, but how can it be a lose? The guy's failed a drugs test and he's back in there fighting.
Yeah.
Some fighters who are active, fit, not injured don't get back in for a year.
No.
You know what I mean? He's not really served any kind of punishment whatsoever. If he's back in there, whether he performs great or he doesn't, as long as he avoids getting beat, it'll be a successful night for him. Because if he looks ordinary, a lot of people will be all over social media saying, well, look at him, he couldn't knock that kid out, no one's ever heard of him, and blah blah blah. He's got a padded record. Again, if this is the case, he's got a padded record of 32 wins in 35 fights. So Conor Benn's obviously, he's gone from knocking out your Chris Algieri's and some of those guys there to now this. Yeah. It's obviously because he's not on the juice anymore. That's what the narrative will be. The quick spin for Matchroom and for Conor is, well, I've been out the ring for the year. I've had all this stuff over my head. It's been difficult. This guy's durable. He's never been stopped before, and it's been a difficult thing for me, and I'm just happy to get the win. That'll be the narrative. That'll be what comes out of it. I'm just happy to be back in here, and you'll see me much better out when I knock out Chris Eubank Jr. and then bang, we're straight onto that one. I think the bigger problem is for Conor, if there is something where he looks like he's missed a step, and he's talking about, I mean, again, I don't want to just continue hating on him, right? But I saw an article earlier this week about him saying he'd fight Golovkin. We're talking about a 147-pounder that dabbles at 154, talks about fighting Chris Eubank Jr. at 160, sorry, and then wants to go up to 168.
Even Chris Eubank didn't fight him. How are you going to get in there with him?
To take on Golovkin? I mean, Golovkin, even at this age now, I actually replied to something on social media and said, put him in with Golovkin.
Yeah, see what happens.
I'd rather see that than him get banned. Honestly, I mean, even Golovkin at this age now, I mean, we're talking about a seriously big hitting dude with bags of skill. All right, he's at the back end of his career, but he fucking smashed Conor Benn to bits.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean. It's like the ego trip of Conor Benn. It's just turned me off massively from him. He's just gone to this, and maybe he's playing a blinder. Maybe he's
So
just turned heel.
do you think this is the tactic from now on?
Well, I think it's got to be. I think it's the only way forward where he's marketable. I think if he goes very vanilla or tries to win people back over, he'll be slagged off, he'll be done whatever else. Whereas he can go very Floyd Mayweather here and become that person where he pisses everybody off. They just tune in to watch him hopefully get beat.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like this card here. It's going to boost numbers. People are going to tune in and watch because they're thinking, let's see what Conor Benn looks like. I think there'll be more interest in this fight, even though he's not got a big opponent, than some of his previous fights, because people go, I want to see what he looks like.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's a big draw, and I think it's, don't get me wrong, I think it's a stroke of genius from Matchroom, but I don't agree with the stance on it. But I sent something out earlier this week. We talked about contractual issues when we were talking about Conor Benn, and Eddie Hearn was saying about he couldn't pull the fight contractually with Chris Eubank Jr., when they originally made it. And that's why they weren't able to pull it off, blah, blah, blah. Then it was the British board condemned the fight, and then that was it. It was off, right?
Yeah.
Conor Benn's promoted by Matchroom. And if he has a contract with Matchroom, which he will, that states that they have to give him X amount of fights in a certain period of time, if as long as he's fit, well, and whatever else,
Yep.
Eddie might not have a choice but to put this fight on, because legally Conor's allowed to fight.
Yep.
So if there's a way and a means for him to be able to fight, there might be something contractually where Matchroom can't stop him from fighting anyway, even if they disagreed with it. I don't know that factually, but it's something that kind of crossed my mind the other day, and I thought it's an interesting point again.
Yeah, it's something to take into account, definitely. I mean, as we kind of talked about last week, unfortunately, situations, as we see with so many athletes and legal problems, we're just never going to know the full story, are we? Especially in a sport like boxing, where we've got corruption and behind the scenes issues that are such big issues anyway.
Yeah.
That as fans, we're just not going to know. But I think to kind of round off my views on the Conor Benn situation and his fight this weekend, I'm enthralled to see him back in the ring. I'm interested, and this is maybe, as you say, a genius ploy from Matchroom and the Conor Benn team with this villain narrative, where, as you say, we just all want to watch him fight, and if he gets knocked out, we can go, well, that's what the general public
Proof's
want.
in the pudding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we obviously touched on Conor Benn last week, so we're not going to go on any further. Wasn't even going to be a talking point this week until that got released, but here we are. So there are two Brits in action this weekend that I particularly want to point to. Number one is sticking on that same card before we move on and just pretend that it's all a bad nightmare and this fight night in Florida is not actually going ahead. We've got Sandy Ryan fighting up against Jessica McCaskill. So that should be a belter of a fight. People should tune in and watch that. It's a big step up for Sandy Ryan. It's a unification there. And McCaskill is older, wiser, bigger, stronger. I see Sandy Ryan having a little bit of a tough night, but it's a kind of make or break fight. She's proven herself to a certain level now, and this is a step up. But if she can step up and she can win this, there's potentially a knock with Tasha Jonas down the line. A couple of other fights out there for her, so it's an interesting one for Sandy Ryan's development. But it'd be interesting to see if McCaskill's missed a step or whether she's still the same killer she was before.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because she's 6-1. A couple of knockouts within her first three victories, and okay, as we kind of alluded to last week, women's boxing at the starter levels, if you like, we haven't maybe got the depth that men's boxing has. We maybe don't know if the proof is in the pudding when she beats some of these people. Split decision loss to Annabella Farias as well. So that was, performance level wise, I think she's a very exciting prospect. And I think it's a very interesting opponent this weekend in McCaskill. And as you say, McCaskill's got to be very careful with her experience, that she doesn't underestimate or that she's done the right amount of preparations, because there's a limited amount of footage and research you can actually do when it comes to somebody like Sandy Ryan. Yeah,
completely agree. But the big talking point that we were planning was the Joe-Joyce 'Joe' Joyce 'Joe' 'Joyce 'Joyce' 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 'Jo It's going to be an interesting one, mate. I'm a little bit on the fence at the minute. I think the big factor for me will be Joe Joyce's weight, what weight he comes in at this time round. That's not the only thing that's going to make a difference here. He's got to change some things dramatically. But just give me your thoughts on the fight this weekend.
Really excited. I think I mentioned it last week. Great to see heavyweight boxers, ranked heavyweight boxers, good heavyweight boxers taking on each other for once in a while. I'm really excited. I thought the first fight, Zhilei Zhang got everything correct. Well, 90% correct. Counter punching was absolutely brilliant. That right hook combined with that left straight just connected every single time with Joyce. Couldn't miss. Accuracy was incredible compared to Joe Joyce's accuracy levels. And Joe Joyce has really got a test in his hands here to get back to winning ways. My main way of looking at it would be that he's 38 years old now. This is a hurdle he's got to get over before the end of if he wants to make something from this short spell he's got as a professional boxer. He's got to get over this hurdle to get onto the next fight quickly, because Zhilei Zhang is a very, very tough game opponent that probably goes underrated around the world.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting one, mate, because I think Zhang's 40. I think he's 40 years of age.
Yeah, 40.
So, neither of them are young men. And I'll be honest with you, this could be a loser retires fight. I'm not sure about Zhang. I don't know where his headspace is at or what he wants. But for Joe Joyce, the amateur career he's had, the professional career, he's always talked about that heavyweight title. That's his only incentive. I think Joyce is not interested in sticking around should he fall short here, because I think he understands the heavyweight division. He knows nothing's going to move quickly. He knows that shot, even if he wins this fight and gets into the mandatory position, he knows he's not going to be fighting for a belt for maybe the next 12 months anyway, hopefully, if Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk manage to get that on. But we're talking about a heavyweight here that, came onto the scene and was kind of the centre of everybody's jokes. Everyone was saying, God, look how Joyce fights, look how slow he is. Gets punched in the face repeatedly, and you can see his punches coming a mile off, but he was constantly breaking people down and stopping them. So it's obviously not as easy in there with Joe Joyce as what it appears to be when you're sat behind the screen. And, there's many heavyweights that can attest to that. But do you think in the fight with Zhang, we maybe saw that he's capable of doing it at a certain level? Or do you think it was just wrong tactics, wrong weight on the night? Because we've obviously seen him beat Joe Parker, we've seen him beat Dubois. So just what do you think?
I'm of the opinion that maybe I might get accused of being a little bit English biased towards this, but I don't know if that injury to his eye had happened, how much longer Zhang had left in that fight, because halfway through round 4, he went back to the same old criticism we've always had of Zhilei Zhang, which is that he does gas out very, very quickly. I mean, I saw, is it Ismail? What's Joyce's trainer called? Ismail? Celis. Yeah, he come out and with talking about the game plan and has said that it was clear the tactic from in the first fight. Zhang wanted those early rounds because he knew what was going to happen later on in the fight if it did go that far. I think Joyce is more than capable of beating Zhilei Zhang personally. There's a whole argument of whether it was just an awful day at the office, whether it was that's the worst Joe Joyce we're ever going to see. But he still had a lot of success to the body in particular. He still landed the odd shot. Okay, he never wobbled Zhilei Zhang, but he did land some shots. And I think if the fight does, if he can get those early rounds under his belt from Joyce's point of view, you're going to see Zhang crumble very quickly, in my opinion.
I think Joyce maybe tried to do something or be something that he wasn't last time out. I think he tried to drop that extra little bit of weight, try to move his feet, box a bit more, have a bit of a higher output, a quicker pace, and that's just not what he is. He's called the Juggernaut. He's a Juggernaut for a reason. He's just a wrecking ball. He's an absolute.
But he came in lighter, and usually you'd associate being lighter with better movement, but his movement was dreadful. He's getting caught with everything.
Well, the thing was, his movement was no different. His movement was exactly the same as it always is, but his durability for taking a shot was gone.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is someone we've seen in there taking heavy shots and not get knocked over. And, you know, he was getting hit with that hand there. And obviously the eye was all bust up, which, you know, that can happen anyway. But it was not, it was, for me, I mean, Joyce has spoken about it since, and he sort of said, you know, maybe he started buying into his own hype of being the juggernaut and not being able to get hurt. And, you know, it maybe played into that a little bit and it backfired.
Yeah.
If I was to give a prediction for this weekend, it's really, I'm going heart over head, because my head tells me that rematches nearly always play out the same way.
Yeah.
And that there's at 38 years of age, there's nothing that Joe Joyce can do to change that. But I don't really believe it. I'm siding with what you said. I think that Zhang has had a higher output because he knew he had to go early, because he knows Joyce isn't going anywhere. And let's not forget, it was the referee that stopped the fight. It wasn't the doctor stoppage, rather than you know, it wasn't Joyce quitting. It wasn't like a Dubois kind of taking the knee situation. This was Joe Joyce kind of just being pulled out of the fire. So we've got, I think we could see Joe Joyce, if he comes in and he's 10 pounds a stone, maybe even over a stone heavier than he was for the first fight, and he looks big and menacing like he always is. And Joe Joyce is a real nice guy. You listen to him talk, he's softly spoken, he doesn't talk a lot of shit, but he is a fighter at the end of the day. And losing and being that close and knowing it's a little bit last chance saloon, I would expect to see Joe Joyce come out, not be hesitant, and throw everything at this. And I think that'll make for a really interesting fight. Zhang's not really got to change too much. You know, that left hand down the middle was just money, couldn't miss. And Joe Joyce isn't going to move that head. He's not going to become all of a sudden elusive. He's going to be there to hit. But the extra weight for me will just make two major differences. Number one, he'll be able to absorb a shot better, and number two, he'll be able to land a lot heavier shots. And you know, I just think the gas tank of Joyce, I think we could be looking at probably a mid to late stoppage, maybe around 8-9 for me, maybe a touch later.
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me that Joyce has got to work on, well, one of the main things, sorry, is his accuracy. I mean, I know maybe you make the excuse of his eye bulging up, but I mean, I've got the stats here. I mean, Zhang landed 82 shots out of 180, 45% accuracy. Joyce landed 85 shots out of 464, and 18% accuracy. Now, Joyce, we've said, doesn't move around a lot. Zhilei Zhang doesn't move around a lot either. Look at the size of him. His movement's better than Joyce's, definitely, but he's not a heavyweight that's always been impossible to hit. That's what I'm trying to get at. And you've got to be much more consistent with your shots and much more varied with the attacks you're going for than we saw in the first fight.
I think the thing with Joyce is he's at his best when he's backing his opponent up. And maybe because the extra weight wasn't there, and maybe because he was getting caught going in, he was still throwing, and he was having to throw more because he was in the centre of the ring, and he was missing because there's more room for Zhang to manoeuvre. Whereas normally we used to Joyce kind of being the aggressor, you know, landing a couple of punches and pushing up against the rope and then just kind of throwing those healthy leather shots, you know. And there wasn't any of that because Zhang was obviously the bigger, stronger man in there, something which Joyce is not used to. I don't think he is the stronger man. I just think that extra weight missing again just played against Joyce, because we are talking about a significant amount, and we're talking about a big guy in Zhang, not, you know, just stature wise. He's an absolute unit. So it'd be an interesting one.
There's also there's no massive shame in losing to Zhang. Zhang, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinions, is an unbeaten fighter. He didn't lose that fight against Hrgovic.
He beat Hrgovic,
yeah. So there's no shame in losing to him and having to do a rematch with him, especially at 38 years old.
No.
But as we say, at the age Joyce is at and what he wants to step into before he does eventually step down from the sport, he has got to get past him.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, for me, I think he gets it done. I think he gets it done late. I think he might even be losing the fight when he wins it, because that would be just typical Joe Joyce. But that's what I'm expecting. I think if he doesn't win the fight, regardless of, unless it's kind of a real close split, robbery, something dramatic, I think if he loses and he knows he was beat, I think we see Joyce hang the gloves up.
I think we could have a very, in my opinion, from what I thought, we could have a very quick tempo to the start of the fight. Ismail Salas has come out and said they know they need to earn these early rounds. They to get those points before Zhang does. Otherwise, that's how Zhang is going to win the competition. And so, judging on that, if that's the game plan going into it, whether it's mind games or not, you are going to see two heavy hitters with very good chins. You could be seeing throwing leather at each other for the first 3 or 4 rounds. That may play into either one of. I don't know whose almost advantage that plays into, because it's whoever's chin holds it better.
I think it plays into Joyce. If I'm honest, I think Joyce has got the better gas tank. I think he could slug away for 15 rounds easily. I really do. I don't think it's the same for Zhang. I think Zhang has to go early again. I think he has to put the pressure on and try and get Joyce out of there again. I think he needs to hurt him like he did in the last fight and sort of make Joyce second guess himself. The difference this time round is, like you said, I think if Joyce goes early, then he can keep that tempo up, and I don't think that Zhang can. Even if he's losing the rounds, I think if he can keep the pressure up and keep in his face and not absorb too much punishment, I think Joyce down the stretch will be the one that kind of takes over the fight and probably gets Zhang out of there. But
yeah,
official prediction, mate. No more fence sitting. Where are you going?
Do you want round by what way?
Specific or as unspecific as you want to be?
I'm gonna say Joyce round 10.
Ooh, a couple of rounds after me, maybe. So
Joyce round 10.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's not a very Brit.
But my outside shout would be an early knockout. If I was going for something where you could earn, but you're going to get good odds and maybe earn a bit more money, I would maybe look at the early, maybe rounds 1 to 6 for either fighter.
Yeah. Okay, mate. There you go. Bit of betting tactics there as well.
There you go.
In a very Brit biased situation between the two of us there. Both going for Joyce.
I like Zhang as well.
Yeah. Again, I have nothing against him. He's a top heavyweight. It's just, at the end of the day, we're English. Let's go, Joe.
Yeah.
Try and pick this tempo up a little bit as well, because I feel all moody and like this Conor Benn situation's just got me.
The thing is, I think you're focusing on maybe. I don't understand why you're doing it. You're focusing on the thing that aggravates you in the sport, because that's the thing that at the minute it's getting the clicks and it's what's getting everybody riled up. But I think, as I kind of mentioned last week, you've got to look at the positive sometimes. And we have actually had a very good year in terms of the fights we've had so far in men's boxing, as we mentioned last week. And, fingers crossed we've got more to come. We mentioned earlier about Lopez winning at the weekend and the featherweight fights that may be going around in that division. So you got to, I think sometimes got to hold your head high and look at the positives that the sport of boxing does do right. And when it gets it right, it's one of the best sports, if not the best in the world.
There you go. The pessimist and the optimist.
There you go.
Could do with Taylor when he edits this. He could do with sticking a little angel on your shoulder there and a little devil on mine. Just so
green around my square and red around your square.
Yeah, I want clouds, thunderstorms, pissing down rain above me. You can have glorious sunshine over on your side of the screen there. But
nice,
it's.
I've not got it outside.
You're right, mate. I mean, there's some good fights coming up, especially over the next few weeks. There's quite a lot for us to dive into, and some interesting talking points. And I love this sport, and I love good fights, and I love them on a regular basis. But we don't get them on a regular basis, and there's so many other. More often than not, you end up talking about the shit side of boxing, because most of it is. The big news is. We've got great fights going on under the radar. It's like this weekend. This weekend was supposed to be a positive one, talking about Joyce and Zhang, and instead we've got everything. If you look in the mainstream media, at least, everything is about Conor Benn. So it just sometimes the sport just pulls itself down a little bit from the outside. From those of us that actually are in and kind of follow it, we can go, okay, that's happening over there, but let's focus on this. Couple of bits just to touch on from that card as well. We've got Anthony Yarde back against the unbeaten TBA. No official opponent from the last time I saw her anyway, penciled in for Anthony Yarde yet, which, again, I mean, people are going to get fed up with me just coming on here and whinging, right? But we've seen Anthony Yarde in there with Artur Beterbiev put on a hell of a performance.
Amazing.
We've seen him in there with Sergey Kovalev putting a hell of a performance again. We've seen him step up. We've seen that we had the two fights with Lyndon Arthur. Okay, one of them he got beat, but the second one, you know, he ended that rivalry conclusively.
Yep.
We again with the MMA comparisons, unfortunately. If this was MMA, Anthony Yarde would be fighting a top opponent at this stage. Even if it was last minute, somebody would be sticking their hand up. You know, we in the UFC rankings, for example, if this was a top 5 contender, somebody inside the top 15 would be putting their hand up and saying, "I'll have a pop at him because it gives me the chance to take that ranking." You know, all that stardom, all that everything else that he's got. It annoys me a little bit that, I mean, we're on Thursday now. The fight's on Saturday. The weigh-ins are tomorrow, and Anthony Yarde's not got an opponent.
Well, as you kind of make the comparison there between, you know, kind of allude to MMA, it's that Anthony Yarde is a perfect example of losses on your record don't mean everything, which is what MMA is brilliant about. One of the things we love about the sport. You can gain traction from losing, whereas in boxing, Anthony Yarde seems to be a victim of the whole my record has got losses on it. And
it's a strange one because I think in some circles, I think you're right, but I think my personal view on Anthony Yarde is this: Anthony Yarde, the best fights that he's had are his losses, because the Lyndon Arthur loss turned him into that killer again. He came back and he stopped Lyndon Arthur and put that one to bed conclusively, like I said, and then he stepped up twice against people that he was supposed to lose to. He hurt Kovalev. He arguably hurt Beterbiev when they were in there. You know, you can't take anything but positives from that, because he's fallen short, but I was never that invested in Anthony Yarde. But he stepped up and he put those performances in, and I went, all right, I'm on board. I'm a big fan of Anthony Yarde now, because put his balls on the line and he tried to show that he was the best in the world. All right, he fell short, but there's absolutely no shame in losing to who he's lost to. You know,
no, I mean, Beterbiev is classed as one of the best boxers in the world at the minute. I mean, and I can't remember the fight exactly round by round, but I'm sure I had him ahead on the scorecards until the knockout. So maybe I've got that slightly wrong, but he put on one of the fights of the year, and he consistently, more than the majority of boxers, especially at that weight class, he puts on very, very entertaining fights. And as you say, to still be confirmed days before the fight, it's almost done a disservice to him as a bloke and as a fighter.
It is, mate, and that's what I mean for his own career. It's not. I'm not really bothered, because Anthony Yarde's going to go out there. He's going to knock somebody over. That's what's going to happen. But it would have been nice to see some. It's not even with Anthony Yarde. It's just kind of with the concept of boxing, because, like I said, the UFC, the guys would be snatching the hand off, you know, on a day's notice, a couple of days' notice, to say, I'll fight him, because it's not an opportunity that they would normally get. Whereas boxing doesn't work like that. You end up with some tin can from somewhere coming in the last minute, and you think, well, get Anthony Yarde's highly ranked. Pick somebody from those rankings, even if it's a top 20. I mean, we looked at the Anthony Joshua one. Your signal's gone up, mate, so your camera's gone off, but hopefully you'll come back anyway. But we've got the you there, bud? There you go, mate. You're back.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm just going to put my laptop in.
I can, mate. There's a bit of rustling going off in the background, but
is that working?
Yeah.
Cool. So I don't know what happened there.
No, it's all right, mate. Well, I've left the recording going.
Right. Okay.
But let me think. I'll try and just trying to think where to start off. What was the last thing you heard? You remember?
I heard. I said he's almost being disrespected, him as a bloke, and then you was talking about how MMA fighters would lap it up a day before to jump in and fight somebody.
It's just try and get something so Taylor can overlap and make it look like it's not missed. I've made a little note just of the time into the call that we are, so I can pass that on, because we had something similar happen in ours, not quite as bad as that. But he was trying to find it, couldn't find it.
Is it the hour mark? Because it's just hit an hour about 2 or 3 minutes ago. It might be the hour mark.
Yeah, it was an hour and 3 minutes. So
okay.
But yeah, I've made a note, mate, so I'll pass that on to him. But yeah, we'll just carry on. Yeah, so when you talk about top 15 opponents, and in the MMA world, we've got somebody would be sticking their hand up last minute and saying,
Yep.
"I'll take this fight," because it's an opportunity that they wouldn't normally get. Whereas with boxing, you don't get that. You just get some tin can coming in and picking up the fight at last minute. When the reality of the situation is, if Anthony Yard is ranked number 6 or number 5 in a certain organisation, why aren't you looking at 15? Why aren't you
Yeah.
looking down? Even when we looked at the Anthony Joshua one, Joshua and Franklin. All right, it was a little bit of a disappointing opponent really for Joshua because he's been fighting at such a higher level, and we knew he was capable of beating someone like Franklin without any issue really. But even he was fighting someone in the top 30,
Yeah.
I think, just. But
who had also should have beaten Dillian White, who was his next proposed opponent anyway.
So there was a bit of a narrative there, and that's what I mean. I mean, even if it was a domestic dust-up, even if it was somebody coming through in the light heavyweight division on the British scene that you maybe thought was not necessarily a prospect, because you don't want to chuck him in there with somebody that maybe he's going to beat him because you don't want to derail his career that way. But again, that's the difference with boxing. There needs to be, if Anthony Yard was paid a little bit extra, he'd say, yeah, I'll fight somebody in the top 15, no worries, last minute. He would. Yeah. He won't care about that. So it's just disappointing that he's back on the card, and it's a bit of a disservice, like you said, to his own career that he's fighting on Saturday night. We don't know who against, but it's kind of like it's almost a non-existent fight because you're not tuning in to watch anything special. He's just going to go in there and knock people out. We've seen that. You know what I mean?
Plenty of times.
So
definitely.
Other than that, there's not too much to delve into. I mean, one bit of news. Go on, mate.
No, sorry, I wasn't going to say anything though.
Yeah, just one bit of news which I sort of spotted, which is not confirmed or anything, but it was just touted as a potential fight. So it was the last thing we'll touch on here before we wrap up. I think it was Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya, that had mentioned that we were talking about a potential fight for Jaime Munguia next up, and he mentioned a possible opponent as John Ryder. Yep. So as Combat Sports UK and sort of looking into that from a British perspective again, what's your thoughts on that as a potential matchup?
Yeah, I mean, how do you say his name again? Jaime Munguia. That's how you say his name. I can never say his name. Obviously, he's second in the super middleweight rankings in Mexico. We obviously know who number 1 is, and we know why he's still number 2, because number 1 won't fight anybody from the same country. So that's the super fight I think we all want for him, but we're just not. I don't think we're going to get it because he's not going to fight another Mexican. And I think John Ryder, we're being a bit generous if we say he was in the fight against Canelo. He was kind of outclassed a bit. Yeah. I know he put his heart and soul into it, and that's why we love him. But he was outclassed, and this probably is a good fight for Ryder. It's still coming up against a very high level opponent, which a lot of fighters wouldn't take on straight away after such a one-sided loss. But yeah, I quite like the call out. I'm not the biggest fan of Oscar De La Hoya, but I mean, I like
not into the stockings and the cocaine, no.
Well, I guess that's part of the act, isn't it? But I mean, we've had it with Don King and people like that before, where that's part of the act. But
yeah,
I mean, but yeah, in terms of the actual fight, I think it's a very difficult fight again for John Ryder. But I'm more than happy to see him again get top level opposition. But what about you, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk John Ryder. You can pick up Jaime Munguia. John Ryder's much easier to say. But yeah. John Ryder, for me, you're right. He wasn't in the Canelo fight. He was comprehensively outboxed and kind of beaten up for 12 rounds, but he showed how tough he is and how game he is. He never gave up and kept coming back at Canelo every chance he got. I actually favour John Ryder, going into that fight. Oh. I really would. I know it's a big shout, but I've been a little bit disappointed with Jaime Munguia. I think he's very hot and cold, and John Ryder's the kind of opponent that if he underestimates him, John Ryder could drag him deep, and I really do. I like it as a matchup because even if I'm wrong, and Jaime Munguia comes through it, you could argue that that's one of the greatest. Well, it will be one of the greatest names on his resume, And John Ryder's tough. He's game. He'll definitely ask some questions, whether he's in there for 5 rounds, 10 rounds, or the full stretch. So I'd be interested. I hope that can get made, and if hopefully it headlines somewhere over in the US, and it's another big payday for John Ryder, because the reality is John Ryder's probably not ever going to become a world champion.
No.
But John Ryder is a fighter that a lot of British talent up and coming should be looking at as, look at this guy, he went out and fought some people, and he wasn't good enough, but he put his balls on the line, and he took some big shots. I mean, we've got the Callum Smith fight, which it's not arguably, he beat Callum Smith, and I'm a big Callum Smith fan. But John Ryder beat him on that night, despite being robbed on the cards. You've seen him in there against Canelo. You've seen him in there with Nick Blackwell. They've had some cracking domestic dust-ups as well. The
Billy Joe Saunders
fight. Billy Joe Saunders. You know, he's fought a who's who. I mean, he was lucky in the Jacobs fight, because I felt he lost that one. Obviously, came on the wrong side of Billy Joe as well. But the reality is, John Ryder's a top fighter, and he's gone out there, he's fought a who's who, and he's never been a world champion. But people know who John Ryder is because of his character and the fact that he's willing to get in there. So
I think Munguia's best days were definitely super welterweight. You look at his best wins was Liam Smith, Saddam Ali when he won the was it WBO belt, I think it was, and back in 2019, and they were his best performances. He has been a little bit lackluster since moving up to super middleweight, but he's still getting wins, I guess, and that's the main thing for him. And still unbeaten, as we kind of forementioned about how important the O is in boxing. But I feel like I think it's a good matchup. I can only see one winner personally, but that's the sport of boxing, isn't it? You see different ways.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, mate. I mean, when we talk about the step up, and you talk about the weight, I mean, Jaime Munguia, I'm sure he's not listening, but if he is, he'll be one step behind Conor Benn wanting to jump onto the podcast anytime in the future.
But get a banking system going.
Yeah, but he's joining the hit list. That's definite. I'm definitely not making any friends in the pro ranks here. But for me, the step up in weight wasn't needed. No. I see it as just poor discipline, laziness. He's getting away with it. He's not really fighting any big names, and he's just kind of breezing through, getting big paydays and being touted as this next top guy. And I don't see it. I really don't see it. He's very Demetrius Andrade-esque for me. He's got the skill, he's got the talent, he's got the heart. But is he ever actually going to step up and fight anybody in something where he's expected to lose? I think even the John Ryder matchup, you're right, coming into that, John Ryder will be the underdog.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, if there's good odds on it, I would be picking John Ryder, because I think it's the kind of fight where Jaime Munguia could be asked some serious questions. So,
do you think, for Munguia, do you think it's all of his fault that the opponents he's facing? Because obviously he wants to go for the belt, but the person above him doesn't want to give him away to somebody of the same nationality. So, do you think it's 100% all on Munguia, or do you think it's maybe a bit split between the two?
I think it's Munguia.
Fair enough.
I'll be honest. It may be the promotion, because maybe they don't think he's ready. But I mean, when we look at his record there, he's really flattered to deceive. When you look at how many fights he's had to be in the position that he's in, it's a little bit lackluster for me. And he should already be world champion if he's going to be. I just feel like they're kind of teetering along and maybe looking for other names in the sport to step away before he jumps in there when all these belts get fragmented and maybe have his shot. Then that's how it feels to me, because the reality is I don't think he's everything that he's touted to be. I think he's a good talent. I think he's a great addition to the division, but what's the point having a great talent if all they're doing is skirting around, not fighting anybody? We see it in boxing all the time. You can be a world champion and not have to ever fight anybody half decent. It just depends who you're ranked against. If you don't want to make those fights, I always just put the emphasis on, if you're the fighter, it's your career. If Jaime Munguia was saying, I want this fight, go out and get me this fight, he'd get one.
If he beats John Ryder, would you class him a bit higher?
Yeah, I would, yeah. Because I genuinely think, I mean, all right, he showed some stones last time out, Munguia, but I think, for me, I think a win over John Ryder, and maybe I'm overselling John Ryder here, but for me, I think John Ryder's proven. Callum Smith, Ring Magazine champion, you know what I mean? All right, we're talking about a different weight class from where he's functioning now up at light heavy, but we are talking about Callum Smith there, and he beat Callum Smith. He lost to Danny Jacobs, but Danny Jacobs is right at that top end. He lost to Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders was a world champion. You know what I mean? There's a number of fights where John Ryder's shown that he's at that level, and I just feel like it's the kind of fight that Munguia needs to be able to beat John Ryder and say, okay, I'm at this level.
Yeah.
If he goes in there and beats John Ryder comprehensively, then we're talking about a real prospect, because the only person to beat John Ryder comprehensively in the last few years is Canelo.
Yeah. Yeah,
And that,
fair enough. And as we kind of look at Conor Benn's opponent this Saturday at such a young age, with such many fights in his record, it's indicative of Mexico and South America, I guess. But as you say, Munguia, still only 26 years old, but 42 fights on his record.
Yeah, it's mid-40s, I think, now.
Yeah, so you're probably right that he's not, because if he was fighting top class opponents, all the time, he wouldn't have had that many fights in his career. But I go back to my original point. I do agree that since moving up in weight, he has looked a little bit, he hasn't reached the heights I maybe thought he would, but I still think he is that guy for me personally.
Okay. Well, I think on that note, we'll pretty much wrap it up, mate. We've been going just over an hour now. I think next week I'm going to try and make a promise to everybody tuning into the Combat Sports UK podcast. I think I'm going to try my very hardest next week to review Conor Benn's performance and his performance only. And I'm going to try not to talk about too much else, but I do have a feeling that when he gets on the microphone after a comprehensive win, there'll be plenty of talking points to come out of that anyway. But yeah, looking forward to, like you said, sometimes it's easy to get tied down with other stuff, but I'm looking forward to the Joe Joyce and Zhang rematch. I think that's it could be could go either way, but it could be an absolute cracker. There's some other little knocks. That Matchroom card is bang on. There's some good fights on there, so tune in. Obviously, Matchroom will be on DAZN. Frank's show with Zhang and Joyce will be on TNT Sports. Jump on, watch them, see how they unfold, and see whether we've just been talking a load of shit here or whether we actually know some stuff. And we will be back next week because we'll have some fights upcoming that we can preview, and no doubt some other talking points. So follow us on Spotify. We're also on Apple Play and YouTube. Hit the bell, ring the notifications, tune in and watch us. We'll be releasing, more than likely, weekly pods, especially over the next few weeks where we've got some nice fight nights coming up. We also have an MMA podcast, so tune into that if you're happy to jump into both sports. And if you want to know why we whinge about boxing and sing MMA's praises so highly, then have a listen to that, and you'll maybe see that the energy in the room is a little different. But yeah, follow Combat Sports UK across all the socials: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, probably some more that I'm not aware of, but we'll be in there somewhere. So
Apple Podcasts as well, I think.
There you go. Yeah. So look, we'll leave it there, Jay. Thanks again for jumping on this week, mate, and we'll catch up next week.
No, cheers, Nathan. Great to be on here again. And to everybody out there listening, hope you enjoy the fights this weekend, and we'll be back next week.
Yeah, positive, cheery, and ready to rock and roll. Peace out. Cheers.
There we go. Cheers.
There we go, mate. Stop the recording there.